Alright guys, how's it going? I have a confession to make, and that confession is, I am more interested in the technology of graphics cards rather than the actual frame rate that they provide these days. Yeah, I mean it's always great to get more performance, lower power, all that stuff's excellent. But what really interests me is, what are these companies doing that is new and interesting, rather than just simply increasing performance with every new node change, every new architecture. And the graphics card leak website, videocards.com, has gone ahead and leaked the final specifications and the launch presentation of the GTX 1080 one day before the actual release. So there's a bunch of slides here, we've got all the specs, and I'll go through some of the more interesting parts and talk about what I see. So let's get on with it. Right, first of all we've got the specs. There's nothing really much different here, apart from now they are showing the teraflops amount as 8.2 teraflops. Now if you remember, in the reveal a week ago, they were advertising the card as 9 teraflops. Now it's down to 8.2, instead of the 1733 boost clock megahertz of 9 teraflops, they are now counting the base clock teraflops, and the base clock is of course 1607 megahertz. Another difference is the die size, which is smaller than previously believed at only 314mm squared. Previous estimates had it up at around 333mm squared, so it's a little bit smaller than what we thought. And we now know it has 7.2 billion transistors compared to the 8 billion of the GTX 980 Ti and the 5.2 billion of the GTX 980. It only has 64 ROPs, which is the same as the GTX 980 and less than the GTX 980 Ti. This could have an effect at higher resolutions, 4K and that sort of thing. So that's something to look out for in the benchmarks. Right, now let's take a quick look at the architecture. Here is a block diagram of Maxwell GM204. You can see the 4 clusters with 16 SMMs, that's Maxwell Streaming Multiprocessors, for a total of 2048, that's the green squares, CUDA cores, and here we see GP104. Once again we've got the 4 clusters, and we can also see an extra 1, 2, 3, 4 streaming multiprocessors. Again, if we look at the specs, we can see there is only 16 on the GTX 980 and 20 on the GTX 1080. Here is a close-up of the Maxwell Streaming Multiprocessor, and here is the Pascal GP104. There is not an awful lot of difference. Now, I alluded to this in the last video when I said Pascal was Maxwell on speed. One or two of you gave me a bit of stick for that, saying we don't know if that's the case or not. Well, this is the proof of it. There's almost no difference apart from the SM being split in half. The biggest difference is the inclusion of simultaneous multi-projection in the Polymorph Engine 4. If you recall, this is for VR. Otherwise, there appears to be very little difference. Very much an evolution of Maxwell. Again, this shouldn't have been a real surprise to most people, because on this GPU roadmap of a couple of years ago, we can see that Nvidia had planned to go to Kepler, then to Maxwell, and then to Volta. There is no Pascal. Pascal was squeezed in here, and my belief is that it was done simply so that Nvidia could get HBM out of the way, and they didn't really want to risk all these changes on 16nm, so they've gone ahead and added everything onto the big Pascal. Your NVLink, HBM, all of that stuff went onto GP100, and these gaming GPUs that we're getting, pretty much Maxwell with much higher clock speeds. The next big architecture change will come with Volta, possibly before 2018. Right, so moving on to the new technologies themselves. Obviously I don't have access to the slide deck myself, so all of this is coming through video cards. In this one we can see the next generation of high-speed DRAM, GDDR5X, and we can see that it goes up to 10 gigabits per second. It does also require a new memory controller, however it is backward compatible with GDDR5. That is why the GTX 1080 has GDDR5X and the GTX 1070 only has GDDR5. Uses the same memory controller, different memory chips. Now if we go back to the specs, we can see that the memory bandwidth is only 320 gigabytes per second, which is very slightly down on the GTX 980 Ti, but quite a bit ahead of the GTX 980. However, for a graphics card which is thought to be around 25% faster than the GTX 980, it's gonna need more bandwidth than this unless the memory compression algorithms had also improved. And that's pretty much what we've got. Memory compression reduces the requirement for bandwidth. It depends on the game, it depends on the scene. But overall, Nvidia claims a compression benefit of 1.2x, coming from the new compression algorithm alone. Over on the left, we can see that the bandwidth is reduced by up to 28% in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, But in games like Star Wars Battlefront, it's only around 11%. On average, they are claiming 20% compression benefit, compared to the previous generation GTX 980 Maxwell compression. For the total effective bandwidth, they are also including the extra speed of the RAM, for an effective total bandwidth of 1.7 times over the GTX 980. These next two slides show how it works, with all this stuff in pink being compressed before being sent out to memory. This actually works both ways, so not only when the colours are being sent to memory, but also taken back from memory. For example, when the texture mapper wants to draw textures, the bandwidth reduction counts twice, so compression is a very handy technology. This is what it looks for Maxwell, and this is what Nvidia claims the same scene looks like under Pascal. As you can see, there is not much room left to go as far as memory compression technologies goes. This looks like it's about as good as it's gonna get as far as the algorithms go. Compression works very similar to the way it does in programs like WinZip. Before the scene is sent to memory, it's scanned for similar colours nearby each other and compressed to make the scene much smaller. And the smaller size means it takes less energy, less data to transfer, both out and into memory. That's pretty much how it works. Right, so moving on to the display stuff, we've got an increase in the maximum resolution, which appears to come from the DisplayPort 1.3 connectors, and we can see that the GTX 1080 is DisplayPort 1.3 and 1.4 ready, and also HDMI 2.0B with HDCP 2.2. Here is all the video support, and there's an interesting new technology called Nvidia Fast Sync, but we don't have any details on it right now. But judging from the graphs, this technology allows much faster frame rendering, 30 to 40 milliseconds, compared to VSync, which is 90 to 110 milliseconds. My understanding is that this technology is trying to bring better user experience in VR by replacing VSync. This is likely to be something to do with a 90 FPS lock. With VR, you want to be locked at 90 frames per second. You never want to deviate from that. So my guess is this might have something to do with that. Not entirely sure, because we don't have any more details. Now there is also a new SLI bridge, which helps to increase bandwidth between the cards, and they've also included a rather unimpressive looking graph, showing the frame times in 4K surround Shadow of Mordor. Again, it's not an awesome graph, but you can see the new bridge in blue is not nearly as bad as the old bridge in grey or black. Isn't it amusing how you never see these things until they're trying to make their new technology look better? You guys already know what I think of SLI and Crossfire, so I'm not going to bother with any more of this. Right, there's a new GPU Boost 3.0, per voltage point frequency offset. Now, in the previous GPU Boost 2.0, what this appears to be showing is the boost wasn't quite so well fine-grained, and there was a lost opportunity compared to what the theoretical maximum clock speed was. Now with GPU Boost 3.0, the theoretical maximum clock stays the same, obviously, but the frequency can increase depending on how much voltage is running through the card as well. So this should lead to higher boost clock speed more often, and again is just a natural evolution of power and boosting. Now there is of course another new display technology called HDR. This is going to make a massive difference to monitors. This is something that requires a video of its own, one that I will do at some point in the future. Right, now asynchronous compute. This is one that obviously an awful lot of people have been looking out for, as an awful lot has been made of Maxwell's lack of such. This is a pretty generic looking slide, but we also have this Pascal dynamic load balancing. Now down the right you can see graphics and compute. If you watch my asynchronous shaders video, you maybe remember a slide very similar to this. This was of course from the asynchronous shaders evolved article over at AMD, where we saw a similar type of load balancing in action, using asynchronous shaders with graphics and compute running concurrently and reducing render time and latency. Again, this is pretty handy for virtual reality, things like asynchronous time warp. I'm still not going to do my VR video yet. Obviously VR is massive for both companies, and I expect to see a lot of talk about this over the coming months. The interesting thing from the slides is that there is no indication of asynchronous compute being done on a hardware level. So what we could be looking at here is the infamous async driver that Nvidia promised months ago, which could have interesting ramifications if we don't also see it in Maxwell. I don't know for sure right now, but this is the way it looks to me. We shall hopefully find out soon if Nvidia has got a working async driver or if Pascal can do something in hardware that Maxwell can't. Finally, the one look at performance we get, as I indicated in the previous video, performance 1.7 times over the GTX 980. We can see it on the graph, we can see it over here. This is Nvidia's own slide. Performance will be at best 1.7 times faster than a stock GTX 980. Looking at the chart I made in the last video, 4.4 divided by 2.6 was 1.69, or 1.7 times faster. So if you recall, that also means the GTX 1080, by Nvidia's own numbers, which will be best case, should be around 22 to 25% faster than the Titan X 980 Ti. I would be very suspicious of any review tomorrow which shows numbers much higher than that. Nvidia has benchmarked a bunch of games, taken their best case scenarios, and come up with 22% faster than Titan X. I would expect to see something lower in the tech press and not anything higher. Right, so a summary of this one is no surprises whatsoever. The die size is slightly smaller than we thought. Compression appears to have improved as we expected. There's a bunch of new stuff for VR which all looks pretty good in all honesty. Going to be very interesting to see what AMD's done, because obviously AMD's talking an awful lot about VR as well. And I've got the feeling that they're maybe going to be doing it in different ways. Nvidia's VR stuff looks great, no question about that. And it's going to be great to see what AMD's up to as well. We've got a new turbo boost. I'm not sure how great that's going to be. As far as I was aware, Maxwell seemed to hold its theoretical maximum clock pretty well. We've got new SLI bridges. We've got new preemption. The first ever pixel level graphics preemption. I'm going to need to read up a little bit more on that one. We finally have asynchronous compute. And we should be a maximum of 1.7 times faster than the GTX 980, or around about 25% faster than the reference GTX 980 Ti. I believe the benchmarks were done at 2560 by 1600 resolution, which is why it shows so far ahead of the GTX 980, as the GTX 980 is probably more suited to 1080p rather than 1600p. So keep that in mind when you see the benchmarks tomorrow. And basically speaking, you've got Maxwell shaders with much higher clock speeds. Right, that's going to do this video. I just wanted to get this one out today. Obviously, I don't have the cards, I don't have the materials myself. The proper reviews are going to be seen tomorrow. I will of course be taking a closer look at those, and you can expect to see my input on that during the week. As always, there's a bunch of links in the description below, and there'll be a lively chat as well, I am sure. I'll catch you later, guys.